So today I'm going to be making a roof insert for a 1932 Ford three-window coupe for a hot rod shop up in New York. So I've got our aluminum sheet here, which I still have to clean up and we can start laying things out. But I'm going to walk you through the entire process of, again, cleaning the material, getting everything laid out, and then I have a special way I like to lay out for radial stretch on the power hammer. So I'll show that grid pattern. It's actually been asked about in some of my videos. So I'll walk you through how I lay it out and why I lay it out the way I do. So that's coming up in this episode of shaping a 32 three-window coupe aluminum roof insert. So make sure to stick around. So first things first, we're going to clean our panel just like in the other videos. We're going to do our three-step process with rubbing alcohol and glass cleaner and get the aluminum all cleaned up and ready to start laying out. Now that we have our aluminum all clean, we can go ahead and we can start to lay out our pattern. So with it being aluminum, we can't use the magnets to stick the pattern down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some 3/4 inch tape. I'm going to come around and just put some little sections to hold it. And we're going to kind of center it in here the best we can. So I'll put a couple pieces in the corner to start. So just like with our other pattern videos and layout, we want to get the paper as flat as we can. So the only problem with that is where the pattern was taped together, it puts a little bit of deformation in the paper. So a lot of times, like you can even see here, there's a wrinkle. So you'll have to kind of untape and retape to get things to pull as tight as you can. All right, so at this point, I don't think I can get very many more wrinkles out of the paper. So we'll go around and we'll offset our edge. So even if our pattern's a little off, with doing a 3/4 inch offset all the way around, it gives us a little bit of room again that we can move the panel around, and then it allows us to clean this edge up, and it's just a good idea to have a little bit of protection around the outside edge. So again, we're using 3/4 inch tape to go around the perimeter to add our offset. And your offset can be anything you want. If you want 1 inch, 2 inch, whatever it needs to be, you can offset it. But the larger the panel, the more you have to handle. So 3/4 is about my go-to most times. Then I'll come back with my razor blade, just like on the other patterns, and I'll trim off this extra bit of tape so I can get a nice clean perimeter. Then we can take our ultrafine Sharpie here, and we'll just run it around the outside and using the tape as our guide. So from this point, this is all this pattern is going to get used for, is just an overall size pattern. So we'll peel this tape off, being careful not to hurt the pattern. We don't want to tear it. So we'll just come around and unpeel it, and then we can set the pattern to the side. So while I've got it here, the pattern says front. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a note that this is the front of the insert and the front of the car. Now, I can use the power shear just to rough the corners off, and I'll come back and we will fine trim everything with snips and hand file the edge. All right, our blank is all cut out and deburred with the Vixen file, and this is going to be mainly what this entire video is about, other than showing the shaping process here at the end and the initial layout at the beginning to get our blank cut. But when I post pictures online and some videos of low crown panels like door skins, roof inserts, some hoods, deck lids, depending on what it is, there's always a grid pattern laid out on my low crown panels, and I get asked about that a lot. So for me, that is the most important part of this specific video, is to talk about the grid pattern. So I lay everything out on low crown panels with a grid, whether it be on the power hammer or on the wheeling machine. And the biggest reason I do that is because I have a hard time focusing and remembering where I am. So I get distracted very easily. So if the phone rings or the doorbell rings or somebody comes in, my phone goes, whatever. Anything that can pull me away from focus, I'm gone. So by having a grid pattern that I can label, I can keep track of where I am and where I've been so much easier. So we'll go ahead and lay that out, and I can talk more about it. But what the grid pattern is I use 2-inch spacing on all my lines. You can make them smaller than that. It's a little excessive. 2-inch is kind of what I found over the years to be as big as you can go. And that's just from my experience. So I've done like a 3-inch wide grid pattern or bigger, you know, just trying different things, and you'll get ripples in between the gridding. So I like to stick right around 2 inches, and I was lucky enough to find a 2-inch wide, like a yardstick. So that's what I use to separate everything. And you can start on the inside and work your way out, or you can start on the outside and work your way in. It just depends on personal preference. I like to start on the outside and work my way in. And I just kind of eyeball the first lines because there's curves on every side. So it's not a square, it's kind of an odd shape. And again, this isn't, you know, this layout isn't the most critical thing in the universe. Mainly it's just to help keep me on track. The only thing you do want to make note of is like on this roof insert, it's almost a constant shape in both directions. So you can start at the edge and work your way in and get the center of your grid roughly in the middle. So if you're doing something that the main shape is offset into the panel, like say like a deck lid skin or some door skins, you know, the overall shape is not directly in the center, it's kind of offset. You want to make sure to get your center grid, the center of the grid, kind of focused right where the main high spot in the crown is. So that's the only difference, is you want to make sure that the center of your grid is in the center of the crown and kind of build off of that way. But in this instance, since this roof insert is mostly symmetrical, the crown is slightly back, but it's easily blendable later. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that out, and hopefully this makes sense, and I'll walk through it as I go. So I'm going to come around to every side here, and like I said, I'm just kind of getting an average of where, roughly 2 inches inside, roughly squarish, but I'm just kind of eyeballing it because it is an odd shape. Just tidy this line up a little bit. So there is our main perimeter for our grid. So then what I'll do is I'll just move this to the inside of the line, and I'll line that up on any number, it doesn't matter, and I'll come in and I'll start at the 2-inch mark from the edge, and I'll do the same thing, except I'll stop roughly 2 inches from the edge. So then we're 2 inches offset inside, and I'll continue that all the way around, and I'll keep replicating that until I get to the center. So all right, there's our basic grid. Running over the edges, being short or long, it doesn't really matter because all this is a reference point. So you can keep track of where you are, or I can keep track of where I am. So while I'm shaping this panel, I need a way to easily remember where I am or where I have been. So what I do is I don't put anything in the center because obviously I know that's the center. So then I label the negative space in between my grid lines. So I do that all the way around. So now I can keep track. As I'm shaping, I can keep in my mind, I'm working on 1, I'm working on number 1, I'm working on number 2, and so on. But the other reason I like to do this, so all compound panels, low crown, high crown, whatever, if it's a compound shape, there's always going to be a little bit more stretch or shape in the middle of the panel than at the edges. That's how you grow that shape. So by using this grid pattern, I'll start in the middle and I can focus on the center, and that's 1 pass on the center, and then I can move out to number 1, and I'll go across number 1 and the center and back. So then I've gone over number 1 once, the center twice. So then I can repeat that process on number 2 all the way to the center and back out, and then it'll be 1 time on number 2, 2 times on number 1, 3 times on the center. So that's going to grow that shape so much faster than working the whole panel across. Like if I didn't have this grid, you could work like number 6 all the way across multiple times, slowly working your way in. But for me, it's harder to keep track of what I'm doing and where I've been. And before I did gridding, I would get high spots and low spots because I would get distracted or I would lose focus for a second and I would skip a spot. So the gridding really helps me out. I've been doing gridding my panels probably for about 10 years, and it just made things so much simpler and easy to remember. Same thing like if I'm in the middle of a panel and something were to happen, like I have to run out or I get a phone call and I have to leave or somebody shows up, whatever the reason that I get pulled away from doing this, I can make a note either on the panel, on a piece of tape, or in my notebook saying I left off on grid number 3, 4th pass over the whole panel. So it's just way easier to keep track of where I am if that were to happen. I recommend that not happening if at all avoidable, but sometimes you can't control that stuff. So from this point forward, since our grid is all laid out, everything's labeled, we've got our front, and I've got the buck set up behind the camera, I can go ahead and I can set up the MH37 HD power hammer for our initial shaping, and it's all going to be radial stretch. I'll do some other videos talking about the different types of stretch, but in a nutshell, a radial stretch is exactly what it sounds like. You have a round or square die with a contact patch in the middle. The top die comes down and hits the bottom die. All of that load spreads out evenly from the center in a radius. So it's a radial stretch. You hit that, all the force and the stretch spreads out evenly, so we can work in any direction on the panel. So I'm going to get it set up for that, and then we'll speed the camera up because it's going to be a little bit of a slow process, not real great to watch, but we'll clip it, and then I'll show you test fitting it. I'll show you guys how I test fit it to the buck using sweeps and the buck to kind of check where we're going, and we will continue shaping the part. So keep watching. All right, so I've got the MH37 HD power hammer all set up. I've got a 36-inch radius lower anvil in it and a flat upper, and I've got it set about 3 on the stroke scale. And what we'll do is I'll start in the middle of that panel and work my way out using the grid pattern that I just described earlier in this video. And we will work on blending all of that out and slowly building some shape, and then I'll start checking it to our buck that's sitting behind me. All right, with our first initial pass on the power hammer, we've got most of the shape in there we need. This edge is a little loose still, right there. So I can blend out on that. And there's a little bit of a low spot back here. Other than that, it feels pretty good. You know, kind of pushing down to see where it makes contact with the buck. So at this point, I'm going to turn the hammer down and we'll do a planish pass across it, just to kind of blend any of that, you know, the highs and lows out that may have got in there from running the hammer a little harder. So I'll turn that down a little bit. We'll blend across the whole thing. I'm not going to focus on the grid. I'm just going to blend outside to outside, kind of smooth everything out and see if it'll tighten this up a little bit. And then from there, we'll come back and we'll start checking it with sweeps. All right, so I went over with the power hammer on a little bit lighter of a hit, just to work things out, and you can see it kind of tightened up that edge there a little bit, and still we're nice and tight against the buck. But what I want to check is I want to check it with sweeps. So on the buck, I have sweep numbers written. Hopefully you guys can see it from that angle. That it's a number 13 sweep this direction, roughly from about here to here, and then it kind of falls away. So if we get that set back on there, so then what I'll do is I'll kind of drag the sweep across it, and I'm looking for light in the middle. So right about there, I'll have to move the camera and see if you guys can see it, but starting right at about the 2-inch, or the number 2 grid line, I can see daylight through it until it comes back over all the way almost to the 2 again. So right here is a little bit of a low in the middle. So I'll see if I can move the camera over so you guys can see that. We'll raise that area up and make sure it doesn't affect anything else, and change the way that it lays on the buck. So I'll move the camera and we'll see if we can get a good shot of that. Right there you can see a little bit of daylight starting to come through. Right about there is where it starts. And I mean, it's only, I don't know, maybe a 32nd of an inch low, if that. I mean, I can just see the light coming through. So, again, we'll go back to the power hammer, and it's roughly right here inside the number 2 grid. So we'll go, and I'll try to raise that up just a hair. So I've went over the roof insert a few more times with the sweeps, noted any low spots or high spots, and adjusted those on the power hammer by blending that out or raising the lows up. Got it dialed in real nice. The surface finish looks good. The reflection over the panel looks nice. So it turned out really well. I'm happy with it. It fits the buck nice and tight, as it should. There's not a lot of tension built up in the panel, so it's not twisting everywhere. So at this point, I can wipe all the oil and stuff off and the grid marks I had on there, wipe it all down with rubbing alcohol, get it cleaned up and ready to go to the client. I wanted to make note, the aluminum that I used on this insert, it's the same as most of the aluminum I use in the shop. It's 063 3003 H14, which is a very workable alloy. Unless it's otherwise specified by the client, that's my go-to aluminum for body panels. So wanted to give you that little bit of information. And thank you so much for watching the video. Head down to the comment section and let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions about this video, if you want to see certain videos in the future, or if you just want to say whatever's on your mind. So I hope to see you in the comment section, and please rate, review, and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks.